So far, is it going all right? Thank you. Yes, Shekhar. No problem, no problem. Don't worry. I think this is an unconference, so you can do anything at any time during the conference. Welcome.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing.
Yes, yeah.
Let everybody come in. Can somebody get everybody in, please? I'm here. Come on. I just wanted to say that Alex McDowell is here. He's coming for an hour or two. Alex McDowell is probably the world's biggest production designer. He did everything from Fight Club to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory to Superman to almost every amazing movie, and he's top production designing now. He's a supervising production designer for my next film, but he's now working with Intel. Who's here from Intel? Where are they? They were there yesterday, last night. Where are the Intel guys gone? So he's here, he's working with Intel.
Intel inside,
Yeah.
somewhere.
He's working with, somebody just say Alex in that room, please, loudly.
Alex.
Oh, he's here, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh.
So he's now gone into something called world building. And world building, he's taken it beyond film. He's developed little computer models of he builds worlds, not just for architecture, but even I think for chips now he's going to world building. And he's working very closely with Intel on the future of chip design and how that relates to storytelling. So Alex said, sometime you've got to come up and tell us that. Just come in, or we'll ask you, all right? So good to see you here. But here we go on a panel on, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a new reality. Alex is in front of us. We didn't see him, and we are shouting.
Yeah.
That very thing. That's a new reality. It's I think this session was supposed to be from 2:45 to 3:30. What we will do, in light of the fact that we're running slightly short, we'll perhaps reduce the sugar break so you don't have too much of sugar, but we'll bring your cups inside and I think continue our discussion so we don't shortcut what we want to discuss. So this whole theme is today's back office, tomorrow's front office. Is India the next technological superhero? How will the role of today's Hollywood superhero evolve? Has it already started to change? India has the world's largest pool of English-speaking IT talent. Is today's back office employ tomorrow's storyteller? So the top major animation and VFX companies are owned by Indian companies. But is there a market for animation in India? So in this session, we'll explore the movement from human resources to human capital, the role of technology in storytelling, the landscape of technology in support services, and we have extremely good panel here. Of course, I won't introduce and reintroduce Shekhar, but Namit Malhotra, he's Executive Chairman and Group CEO of Prime Focus, most successful company. Mike Bundley, founder of Poets Road, Inc. Ken Silverman and Kushal Ria. Ken is the head of North America, Sanam S4 Consulting, and Kushal is a creative director and co-founder, Movies Media. So I think I would like Namit to start with, or Shekhar, you want to?
No, I'll introduce Namit, but Namit,
Yeah,
I can
talk
tell you,
about him.
7 years ago, I did an interview with Time Magazine and said, how do you see the future of media and entertainment? And I said, you know what, when they make Spider-Man 6 and he takes his mask off, he'll be Chinese. And he'll be swinging in Shanghai and not in New York. And I think we're heading towards that to be true. So I've known Namit for years. Namit used to work as a little kid in a garage doing what? You were pirating videos or something? and he was. And today he owns one of the largest VFX 2D to 3D companies in the world. He's a great deal maker. You should have been on the deal making panel. But the question to you is, in doing all this, you have about, what, 10,000 people working for you in India?
6,000.
6,000. And so what you do is, the reason you're successful is because when all the VFX companies here in the US are failing, you actually take back a lot of work to India where it's actually, you're developing talent there, which is a little cheaper. So the question is, although you're doing back office work and developing cheaper talent, do you see a time when that talent is going to come out and be world beaters and write the new programs and make the new Pixar?
Yes, I think it is a pertinent question, and I'm asked this all the time. In fact, as go back a long time, a time when I used to call him Shekhar Uncle, and he missed that part. When he made the Mr. India film, I remember as a kid watching it and clapping after the film, and that was one of the first instances of Indian film that was really breaking the boundaries in visual effects and storytelling in a different realm. I think, our development over the years has always been predicated on the basis that we are not a back office. I don't think in India, with the technological leap we took between 95 and 2005, we actually found ourselves at the cutting edge of technology at that point. And the opportunity or the challenge I saw was that how can it be that we have sort of a parity on technology, have systems and processes that are built up to match Western standards, and we are just lacking as a market domestically. And that's when the journey to take a real step forward into the Western hemisphere took off for Prime Focus. And over the years, actually, and this is an interesting anecdote I'd say, as part of trying to build a globally diverse business, because I didn't believe in the concept of a back office, I always felt we had to have integrated operations between the West and the East so that they would operate as one. Filmmakers can't outshore filmmaking. That's coming from a film family. I know that the vision of a filmmaker is to maintain the continuity of that vision from the time they conceive it till it gets into the theaters. And in order to do that, you have to provide a seamless interaction and a flawless execution of that vision. And as soon as I stepped into Hollywood, just like we had a big base in Bollywood and had been doing a whole bunch of movies, I found that in late 2007, early 2008, that Hollywood was actually looking to push companies like us out, who were trying to actually build a base in America, to say that we don't need services in America anymore. Unless you're based in the UK or Canada or one of these other international tax-friendly locations, we're not open for business just to be working in the US. I think the India story came much later, but we had to actually quickly, in the time of the recession, move away from the US stranglehold of physical infrastructure to open up facilities in London and Vancouver. And that sort of investment and transformation really started to build the template of what we are now running, where we've got now truly a globally integrated operation that works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, depending on which part of the world or which time zone you're in. We're able to provide a seamless execution of the creative delivery. And that, I think, is the model that we conceived, and it's taken us about 7 years to get there, but I'm glad it's a reality today.
So the question is, why is it that the visual effects company and the animation companies here in the US are in such trouble? Anybody wants to take on that, and why is that happening?
Partially, Namit used the word tax incentives, and more and more and more, I think the studios have been saying, if you can't do it for me in Canada or the UK, where we get the subsidies, we're not interested. And even, I know some of the other Indian companies would cut their prices to say, well, look, we're parallel with what you would pay, including the subsidies. Still not good enough. They want the subsidies. On the animation front, if I can step back a little, I'd like to, in a sense, jump off of something that Namit said, or what Prime Focus has done, and give you a little bit of context about the animation industry in India and then how it relates to the US. Probably 3 weeks ago, I think it was announced, Namit, that Reliance MediaWorks is going to be merged into Prime Focus, and that Prime Focus will be the surviving company. What's interesting and telling about this, Reliance and the Tata Group are the two biggest companies in India, bar none. They're the two biggest. Both of them going back to, particularly Tata, probably going back to about 99, 2000, and Reliance, some years later, decided that the entertainment business, making movies, doing animation for American movies and American television series, is a great business. We ought to be in that business. Why should little guys have that business? We, these big companies, are going to step in with all of our power, and we're going to control it. And both of those companies, the two biggest in India, Tata and Reliance, have essentially, I'm trying to find another words besides failed, but they failed. They're, one of the things, and we were talking about this yesterday on a call, one of the things that has made Prime Focus so successful, and in the animation space, there's Prana is probably among the most successful animation companies. There's another company called DQ. You have visionary founders with passion and commitment to doing the business, to the creative process, to making films, to working with creative people, and recognize and appreciate the creative process. Both Tata and Reliance, as well as my first major Indian client in bringing them to the U.S., goes back almost 17 years ago, a company called Pentamedia. Their perceptions were that Indian engineers are the answers to everything. If you're going to start an animation company, take your Indian engineers, teach them how to draw, and you've got animators.
Yeah, because they know something called jugaad.
Jugaad.
Yeah, means how to
Quick
put
fix.
a nut and bolt together in ways that nobody else in the world knows.
Obviously, the real way to do it is you teach an artist how to use a computer. So both of those companies had corporate, administrative, bureaucratic types running their operations, Tata and Reliance, and did not have visionary, passionate filmmakers or creators, and both of them failed ultimately to penetrate the market.
So somebody else would. Why did Rhythm and Hughes fail? Rhythm and Hughes was run by a very, very, very passionate filmmaker, if you like. They did all the visual effects for Life of Pi, and I know, Namit, that you at one time were considering buying Rhythm and Hughes, which is going bankrupt. You and I talked about it. Ultimately, Prana, which is another Indian company, they bought it. Why are these companies failing? Why does a company that has on one level go and take an Oscar for Life of Pi, and then the next day declare bankruptcy?
I think, well, sure. I mean, we actually just recently hired Prana and R&H we're producing a project for Marvel that required 3 hours of 3D animation. And we looked at animation houses all around the world. We ended up doing sort of a crossover between doing all the previs here in LA with Third Floor and then hiring Prana and R&H for the actual production animation. I think one of the biggest things, having a lot of friends in the VFX and animation business, is that in the U.S., we sort of work with a very migratory work structure. So artists, they float in, they basically get paid, based on their day rates, and then they leave. And it fluctuates very heavily, where we might have the same artist that works for multiple VFX companies and on the same projects. So same thing with the Marvel projects. We end up hiring people that work for one VFX company, and then as soon as they go to another project, we just pull them in and continue working. And it's been great to keep costs down, because you can say, okay, this is how much I need, I'm going to hire these artists for this amount of time, and then they go. The problem is they get paid very handsomely in the US, and they know that they're going to take off because they want to constantly be looking for new places to work. And when you look at a company like what Prime Focus has been able to do, and what Prana is able to do, is you have a large workforce, so there's a little bit of confidence in the idea that it's going to go for a long term. And if you have, and obviously when you look at India and how the workforce is structured there, the concept of sort of getting hired for only a short amount of time and then leaving is not the same. I mean, people are expecting in India to have a minimum of a 6-month contract.
Is that true? Do
So
you
I
find that people stay longer at Prime Focus in India than they will here?
I think that's also to do with, again, I wouldn't say that the industry in India is healthier than the industry over here. I think there's enough examples of companies that have come and gone back in India as well. My competitors from 5 years ago don't exist today in the Bollywood domestic market. So there is something to be said about, the industry is fraught with this fundamental issue of you're in a project-centric business that is mapped by a company like us, or other companies that have a workforce of, people who are there as permanent fixed employees. And that's the balancing act that's hard. Now, to your question earlier, I think, it's not just visual effects. If you think about it, visual effects companies have still, I would say, overstayed their existence in California much beyond production has. You can't name a single film that's in the top 10, top 20 category in any year over the last 5 years that has been filmed in California. So all the production itself has been moved away. The studios have made a conscious decision to keep their own stages empty, not hire some of the best crews in Los Angeles and move their productions into foreign locations because of the cost of production.
Yep.
Visual effects is a part of the production cost, and companies that were not able to adapt to that scenario have found themselves incredibly challenged. And that's something, like I said, we encountered that in early 2008 where we were 300 people in LA, we are down to about 15 because we can't sustain the business here. The studios give you no credit for having a huge infrastructure in this part of the world, and that is the unfortunate but the factual reality of which is why we see companies in Canada or the UK are actually healthier than companies in the US particularly. And India is still further ways away. I don't think there's enough that India or China has done to really make a dent in the Hollywood market as yet. I think that's where I think America's lost more movies to professionals in Australia, the UK and Canada in the last 10 years than it has to China or India.
Kushal, what do you think?
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, because of the VFX industry, the costs and the quality and the technology, the barrier to enter has reduced considerably. And in India, where there is such a huge task force available, and they're passionate and they want to learn new things, and animation is something that India has honestly been catching up to. It's not something that was originated in India. So we took some time getting there, but we are there now, and there is an immense desire. And so when people are looking to put work out, India is one of the top candidates to do that, and because of the language and understanding and the understanding of cinema and film, and I think it's just a very natural progression that it goes to India, and it's just a matter of time before India gets more, starts doing more IP and creating content, not just doing outsourcing work, but actually creating content which the world can see and appreciate, and holds that high benchmark of international animation. That's something we are missing so far when it comes to original IP, but yeah.
So why has India not created IP in animation?
I think predominantly it is
Because it's not just the film, it's the software. I mean, Pixar has its own software, Disney have their own software. We have the largest pool of IT professionals in India. Why have we not yet created a software that that's an IP in India?
I think more than software, like you said, we have so many intelligent people, and why haven't we done that yet? I think because
Prana has.
Sorry?
Yeah, Prana actually has.
No, I mean in terms of creating IP based.
Sorry, so Prana has created in India or created it here?
Well, that's a good question. They actually migrated a lot of the Rhythm and Hues software over.
Who
to
wrote
be
it here?
used. Yeah. And
Okay, so that comes back to my fundamental question here, is that about to happen? Because we have such large back office people who are migrating to here, the Indian companies or the Chinese companies are going to take over the world market in terms of animation and
So
VFX?
Shekhar, I have a slightly different take on,
Yeah.
it's not India or China. I think we all talk about these devices, designed in California, assembled in China. That's Apple for you. Tell Apple to move its entire manufacturing base back into America, and it won't be the company it is. So I think, and China, with due respect, cannot do what Apple does. I think we just have to agree that there are complementing strengths, and I think our model at Prime Focus was very clearly laid out on the premise that we have to bring the best of the world together. This is not an India only or a China only prerogative. You know, we have to collaborate. Innovation and technological, technology brings it together, but we have to provide people, the understanding and the sensibilities ultimately, because ultimately, Hollywood is Hollywood because it communicates to the world. India and China are still, I think, figuring out their own markets, and trying to, India particularly, I think Bollywood movies don't run, I think Harry Potter does more business than a Bollywood movie does in the south of India, and perhaps vice versa. So I think there are diversity of culture discrepancies that people have all talked about. I think we have to really build a sense of collaborative connect. And I say this in a sort of a rudimentary example because it's odd that we are in the entertainment industry and we are sort of trailing behind other industries. But just to give you a sense, my grandfather was a cinematographer in the 1950s who collaborated with Ernest Hello, who shot Gone with the Wind, to bring the first color film to India called Jhansi Ki Rani in the 1950s. And there seems to be a complete shutdown till I think you actually reopened those doors, that you can have people working on both sides of the world, opening those doors. And I think that's really been an unfortunate but real scenario. And I think that's something that we have to do better at in the entertainment industry. We have to learn how to really collaborate across these continents and cultures.
Yes.
I think talking about animation, we have to separate theatrical feature animation and television animation. The bulk of theatrical feature animation is still done in this country. Pixar does it all here. They won't move it out. DreamWorks is starting to do a little bit overseas, but it's mostly here. Television animation, however, particularly CGI animation, India really came into its own doing work-for-hire CGI animation. One company, as an example, I mentioned DQ earlier, they started doing episodic CGI animation, particularly for a guy named Mike Young, who's kind of a pioneer in bringing work to India. Mike then, rather than a pure fee-based, said, let's do a co-production model. If it's $100,000 an episode, I'll pay you 50, and 50,000 you'll have skin in the game and you'll kind of ride on the success of it. DQ is now a publicly traded company in India doing its own IP, television IP. They probably have, I'm guessing, several dozen co-productions, and I read 2 days ago Viacom in India has done a licensing deal with DQ to take all of the merchandising on for Jungle Book, which is, I mean, it's a Kipling original piece of property, but it's a DQ and intellectual property for television animation, and it's only the second time that Viacom has taken on a IP that it doesn't own. So again, television and film are separate.
But I also think it's just part of the natural, global progression. I mean, Japan, obviously in the 80s, yeah, TV animation hasn't been done in the U.S. for coming on 30 years now, but Japan used to be the epicenter, and because from a workforce standpoint, from a technology standpoint, they could produce it. But then as they got too expensive, the work moved to Korea, and Japan started switching into, producing more IP for ingestion into the U.S. Korea then also started to, to do original IP. I was there doing a movie years ago, and at the time, we were being shopped a bunch of IP from Korea to come into the U.S., and while we were there, we got pitched 5 different TV series, all of which were based around kimchi. And there was, there was a cultural misunderstanding because most Americans obviously had zero understanding of what kimchi was, let alone want to watch superheroes that are named after kimchi ingredients. And so it was then Korea got too expensive and the work moves to India. So I think as India grows and continues, with Prana and with Prime Focus and with a bunch of other companies, you run the risk that India at some point will mature to the point of becoming too expensive, and Malaysia will take over from a workforce standpoint. Yeah. And hopefully India's IP at that point will start to trickle more into the U.S. culture.
It's also worth noting, speaking of IP, that there have been a number of Indian produced and distributed animated theatrical features. Unfortunately, none of them have done especially well, and none of them have gone global. One of them was a Disney Yash Raj co-production, Roadside Romeo. And I mean, at some point, perhaps on the panel, you wanted to get into a discussion of is there a market for Indian IP animation in India, theatrical?
Okay, so two questions here, and I'm going to open it out to the audience. One of the things that why VFX and animation is such an interesting question is the IT business in India, for example, and in China, we grew and we grew and we grew and became, but we stayed for a long time back office. We were support systems to the world, whether it was any kind of business. To Intel, we were a support system. To Cisco, we were a support system. To everybody, we were a support system. Visual effects and people like Namit were the first ones to come out of being a support system to come out and buy some of the major companies. And China, of course, is doing it. But certainly, Namit, you and Prana, for example, are the prime examples of people who started by support systems and then came out, and you now are the leading VFX and company in the world. That's one question. How did that happen? What decision did you make? I mean, I know it's a series of chance and decisions. What's a fundamental thing you said to yourself? Because you lived in India, you came from an Indian Bollywood family, and you suddenly one day made this decision. What was that?
I think, probably I was too young at that point.
That's the decision, I'll stay young.
I think, clearly, we did really well back in India, and I think we did better than we ever thought we would. So after we got to a certain place, we said we won the national, we were playing at the national levels, let's see if we can get the World Cup. And that was a big motivation to see, to try and see if we could really help bridge that gap. Again, IT companies in India had proven that that model was going to work. I think filmmakers like you, my grandfather, other people had proven that it can work. So I think I just sort of saw that as an opportunity for myself and said, if you're going to do it, this is the time, and let's see, what it takes to make it happen. And we raised a bunch of money and said, let's put our best foot forward and go for the ride.
Yeah, how many people told you you're crazy?
Everybody, including my father.
Yeah. So, yeah, I know that. Every time I do something, everybody says you're crazy, then I know I have to do it. That means it makes sense. So the other question that I have on this is, one of the things that Japan did, we talk about animation in India, we talked about yesterday, Jeffrey, we talked about animation China. Why is it the why Kung Fu Panda will succeed and then Chinese animation won't? What is it? What is it about us that Finding Nemo will succeed and then Indian animation won't? Jeffrey. Sorry, I was...
Well, partly, it sounds like a joke, but the success of Kung Fu Panda is because it's made in America.
Okay.
And I think, I forgot who's from Oriental DreamWorks said in one of the summit, which I knew before that, was if you started Kung Fu Panda 1, we're talking about 1, as animation co-produced with China, probably you won't get past.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll be banned because at least to some Chinese officials, animation is still for kids, so it's educational. And it's very problematic that you have the father of a panda, which is not a panda.
Okay.
How do you explain to your kids, okay, this is bad education? And so that's why but of course, after the first success, and all the Chinese say, why Kung Fu Panda is not made by the Chinese? Yeah, because Kung Fu and Panda are Chinese.
Yeah, they're both Chinese, that's what I wondered. But what the Japanese did was, is there a problem? Because the Japanese developed anime, which is a far cheaper form of animation and was highly styled, much more towards the Japanese taste. India's not developed, although we have such a huge interest and talent in art and drawing with our own kind of art. Yet when we go to animation, we do Me Too animation. We do Me Too like what Disney does, or maybe what Pixar does. We can't do that. But let's try and do what Disney does. Why has India not developed its own animation, its own style?
If I may, I mean, I think that one of the main problems is that when we started into animation, our foot in the door was through service work. So people were concentrated on that for the longest time. And when we thought of, okay, let's start making our own content, we wanted to jump the gun. We didn't pay our dues. We didn't learn the tools of the trade enough. We didn't develop our skills in animation. We didn't learn to be animation storytellers. And that is a price for which we are still paying today, because our products are, the content we create is not very well thought out. Investors don't invest so much time and energy in pre-production because they want to get their film made and get it out and on whatever money they want, they've invested back. So we need to spend a little more time in development. That's one of the root causes why we haven't really developed any IP which works internationally in animation. And secondly, I think we are also wanting to create for the Indian market, and that is a debate in itself, where Indian animation has not been successful in India. And because again and again, the Indian audiences vote with their rupees, and we don't get that amazing box office when it comes to Indian animation. In 2012, we had like 5 movies coming out. 2D, 3D, CG, mythology-based, non-mythology-based, and none of them had really exceptional box office to talk about, So, I mean, that is something to think about the demand for animation in India too. Does it exist, and should we create for them?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I think, I have an interesting observation, on Indian animation, just to what you said. Again, it's one of those classic examples that, the first film that actually did some business was Hanuman, because it connected sensibility-wise. Forget about the fact that creatively it could have been better or worse, didn't matter. It did well. And then there's a television network, that we've been supplying animation work to for the last 5 years. It's not animation work we'd put on our showreel, but it's called 9XM Music. And it's been, it was the first test that these guys did where they introduced CGI characters and Indian characters that would act as VJs and dance and entertain the audiences, and created something very interesting. Now, what's working there is the content. It's not for me to sit here and say animation quality. We do work for Lego on the animation side, and we know that that's creatively or qualitatively, visually significantly superior. But to the Indian audience, the 9XM characters are much more in line with the sensibilities of what works, and that they were actually contemplating turning that into a feature, just taking those characters and turning it into a feature. So I think the seeds are being laid for animation to evolve. I'm pretty sure that the change in the consumption patterns with the newer generation on the rise is going to create that opportunity for Indian animation projects or the big visual effects projects that are now all becoming more and more commonplace for the Indian market.
I'd like to add something there. When I was advising Tata, I mentioned we did a joint venture, Yash Raj and Disney co-produced Roadside Romeo, which Tata Alexi did the execution for. And it had major Bollywood stars doing the voiceovers. In the early run on the film, and it was, in many respects, it was very well done. Big Bollywood dance, musical numbers. It really pushed the envelope in terms of trying to be an Indian and not mythology, but Indian entertainment. People were showing up at the box office and realizing that they were not going to see these actors on the screen live, but they were only the voices. They wanted their money back. When they realized that it was 85 minutes running time as opposed to 3 hours running time, that's not a value proposition. I want my money back. So I think that it was on an earlier panel, they talked about the difference between Hollywood and Bollywood. The movie-going experience for the largest bulk of the Indian audience and the movie-going experience for people in the U.S. being willing to pay regular theatrical prices for a 85, 90-minute animated film, it's just different, and you've got to deal with that too.
So people like to go to the theaters and have nice air conditioning and sleep there as well. So don't forget one more purpose.
No, I remember as a kid going to the theater, and if it was like a 3-hour film, we all cheered and clapped. 3.5 hours. You know, you have 3.5 hours to try and hold your girlfriend's hand.
Yeah.
So, and it's all air conditioned, like, what could be better?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and
I
then
think-
if it was just like 2 hours, we booed. So like, what the hell? We're not getting our money's worth.
I think Kung Fu Panda is a great example because I think a lot of the Chinese companies that we've met with have consistently said what Jeffrey said, which is why was Kung Fu Panda made in the U.S. And I think it's not going to be long before the U.S. animation studio